Hiya crafters, Amy here with Amy's Wares, and I have a die cut only card to share with you today. I'm going to be using this awesome die set from Echo Park, and if it is still available, I will link it in the video description box below with all the other items that I used. But I have my blending brushes, I have some white cardstock, and here are a couple photos of the finished card that I'm going to make for you today. As you can see, there's no stamping, it's only die cutting and some ink blending. So I'm going to show you how I did it. Now to start, I'm just going to pull out this new die. I haven't used it before. Now you can cut apart these pieces, but I opted not to just because I'm not actually using colored cardstock. I'm just going to use white cardstock to make it easy for myself. I'm going to use some mint tape to hold it down, and I will run it through my die cutting machine off screen. But I knew that I was going to color all the little pieces parts myself, so that's why I opted to just keep it together and do it in white just to save some time. So as you can see, everything popped out great except for this floral bit. So I did bust out my metal shim and lined the die back up and ran it through again, and then it came out easy peasy. So if you have delicate little dies like this, definitely consider using a metal shim if you have some issues. But I'm just using my little pokey tool, and these little bits came out with no issue at all. So I am going to keep the negative space of this white cardstock because it is going to help me with my ink blending. Now I decided I don't really need it for this flower pot base just because it's kind of big, and I don't mind getting ink on my fingers, which as you'll see I quickly do. But I do end up using that negative space for the other little more fiddly bits that, you know, cut out from that die. So here I have a little smattering of distress inks: Bundled Sage, that went too quick for me, Rusty Hinge, Fired Brick, I think Peeled Paint, and Hickory Smoke, I believe are the colors that I used. But these are more neutral tones. As you know, I use a lot of Catherine Pooler inks, but I don't really have many of her neutral tones, or any of them rather, so I decided to bust out my little distress inks, and these are dye inks, so I'm using my same normal dye designated blending brushes from the Rabbit Hole Designs because these are my favorite, and I'm using these two colors to kind of create a terracotta color. Now I know Catherine Pooler does actually have a new terracotta color actually, but I don't have that yet, so I'm making do with what I have. And when I added that Rusty Hinge on top of that Fired Brick, it ended up making a very close match to terracotta. So here I'm using more of that mint tape just to kind of hold down this little floral part, or the little leaves part, so it doesn't kind of rip on me when I'm trying to ink blend. And I'm going to use these two green colors, just kind of heavier handed in spots and lighter handed in others, and then it gives it this nice gradation in color, so it gives it some dimension, even though I'm just using a couple colors and it's, you know, overall relatively flat. So once I'm done ink blending that, then I'll pop that back out and get all these little pieces kind of ready to go before I assemble them. And then I have the little inner portion of the pot, which I use the Hickory Smoke, and I do believe I come over it as well with one of the warmer colors, just so it's not, you know, too gray. But this is just an easier way to just use, you know, your white cardstock and then color it as you want. But obviously you do have the option of using up your paper scraps, or even pattern paper would be cute on that flower pot, or if you have colored cardstock, you know, dies like this are perfect for that. So here I'm using the bloom portion just because I want to ink blend these, but I also want to kind of keep them in the order and in the exact location that they're intended. So here you can see I'm just using the ink blending just from the top, and then kind of coming in with a different color on the bottom. So it kind of gives it some visual interest and helps tie it in with the colors that I've used. Now this is a pretty clean and simple design, but I do need to create some sort of grounding for this pot. So I end up using my mint tape again, and I'm just using the grid marks on my glass mat here just to do a straight line across the bottom. And I'm going to just do some very simple ink blending to create the illusion of a ground across this card base. And I am working directly on a card base of 110-pound Neenah Classic Crest Solar White. And I'm just using my blending brush and some residual ink just to create like a gray shadow or the illusion of ground. And then when I remove this tape here, you can see you get a perfectly straight, crisp line, which will kind of create the floor for your flower pot. So now I'm just going to kind of assemble these pieces. I know that I want to pop up the rim of the pot with some blending foam. So I'm just kind of laying things out and figuring out where I want them to go. But I'm going to use different adhesives, you know, either my tape runner here to put down certain pieces, and then I do have these little tiny foam strips that are kind of like the Doris foam strips, but they're a little bit lower profile, and I do get them off of Amazon. I'll link those as well below, but they have a really good price point. I think about 500 of them for $10 or so. But this worked perfectly to kind of go behind this rim, at least on the lower portion. I did end up having to snip one of these tiny strips in half again, just because this top rim is really, really thin. So I used some scissors here to just kind of cut that as best as I could, just to create an even tinier strip. I felt like Laura Bass in here with her crazy little teeny tiny microscopic foam strips. I don't know how she does it, but anyway, I channeled her for the strength to do this. And I removed the backer and then kind of put that down. So that's the only part that's really popped up. And then I put down the inner portion here, again, just with some, actually I used some liquid glue just so I could have some wiggle room to move it around, because I thought with that top piece popped up, it might take a little finagling to get it in place, which as you can see it did. And then what's left is just basically to put in the foliage. Now I could have probably supported this a little bit better. I put liquid glue on the front of it where I knew it would kind of nestle in under the lip of the terracotta pot, but I wasn't really thinking in terms of supporting the top parts of the leaves. So if I did it again, I'd probably put more little fiddly bits maybe behind just the top back part of the leaves themselves. But I think overall they did have some support from the back of the pot as well. So I think it'll be okay. But if you're worried about that getting crushed in shipping, then definitely just consider putting some foam pieces behind that, and then it won't be an issue. So here you can see I have some little parts that I'm trying to pop out, but I'm also using that mint tape just to hold it in place, because I do want it to stay exactly as is intended. And you can see it is 3 different pieces. For some reason, when I bought the die, I thought all the bloom letters were connected, but as you can see, they are in 3 different little pieces, and I wanted them to stay in exactly the correct spot. So this is just a way to kind of use the negative space to kind of keep them in the right place before you put them down. So there's probably an easier way to do this, but I just use the tape to my advantage to hold the pieces together, and then also to add some glue. Now here you can see I was struggling. I really wanted it to line up straight, but I couldn't really see the greatest through the mint tape. I have seen some people using there's like a really almost like a clearish yellow low tack tape that might work better, but I lucked out here. I just went for it and ended up lining up perfectly with that little faux grounding that I created. So I held my breath, made it happen, it worked, and I'm so pleased with how this turned out. This is not normally my jam. It's a little fiddly for me, but I always enjoy it when it's finished. So if you want something a little bit different and want a fun way to use your dies, see what you have in your stash, and just do some ink blending and create your own colored cardstock. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please hit the thumbs up and consider subscribing, and I'll check you next time. Bye.